My name is Bev Suderman Gladwell. I'm currently the chaplain at Parkwood Mennonite Home, a Mennonite nursing home, long-term care home in Waterloo. Gary and Lydia, you two really are the reason I am a pastor today. So I can blame you or credit you, I'm not entirely sure. But back in 1981, when I had that first interview with Jake Bergen, and it's so delightful to be able to have a meal together with him today and to see him here, I really didn't understand that I might be a minister. Having come from Winkler-Brooktaller Mennonite Church in Manitoba, a church which did not allow women to vote, let alone to preach. And that kind of setting made me unsure about where I was going. And the call from First Mennonite to come and be their summer student pastor was the first step on my journey to becoming a minister. You're the reason I'm a decent preacher. Because from my very first sermon on, I was confronted with a group of 3 people or 4 who were making notes while I was preaching, and then sitting down immediately after the sermon to talk to me about what I had done right and what I could improve. It's bad enough preaching your first sermon, let alone knowing there are 3 people making notes to talk to you about it afterwards. I know I learned so much about preaching through that process at First Mennonite and then here at Tennessee. You're also the reason, both of you, why I stayed in ministry, because ministry, of course, has its ups and downs. And in the middle of one of those downs, I called Lydia, and I think it was because of the tornado that had gone through Edmonton that year, and I called to make sure you two were doing okay. And somehow in the midst of me making sure they were okay, I launched into the story of how I was not okay. And Lydia said, well, of course you make mistakes. That's not the question. The question is, you're a human, you make mistakes. The question is how we deal with them. And that comment, Lydia's saying, I don't remember, that comment was a light in the darkness of those months as I tried to sort out what was going on there and sustain me through that. You're also the reason I grew in ministry. After a time at seminary at UBS in Indiana, I then was looking for a place after that kind of gloomy time where I would again feel safe as a minister. And I really wanted to do an internship. Though I had done 2 years as a youth minister already, I felt the need to head back into this more safe surrounding. And coming to Tennessee, to somebody whom I already knew and trusted, and to a setting which I thought I could trust, was a place for me to regain my trust in ministry and to move on. There were, of course, more preaching response groups here. So once again, I was faced with a group of people watching me and learning as I went. I want to end with 3 quick anecdotes about Gary and Lydia. First, Gary, I think you are the person who could drink the hottest cup of coffee that I have ever had in the most quick time. I remember sitting at a ministerial, and the rest of us were delicately sipping this scalding cup of coffee, and before I knew it, Gary was reaching for another cup. Lydia, I fondly remember something you said when I was in Edmonton. All I ever needed to learn about Bible study and about the Bible, I learned from my women's mums morning out group in Edmonton. And I was so struck by the way in which you encouraged me to be open to receiving knowledge from wherever it came. It didn't need to come from a book or from somebody with a PhD behind his or her name. And then finally, Gary, when I was in Edmonton at First Mennonite, I think it's the same pattern here. I was half-time as the intern, and then the church helped me find a half-time job. And the job that year was working for a construction company for a man named Suderman, not related, but lo and behold, that's where I worked. And he was a one-man construction contractor, and I was gopher for the summer, paying bills, painting, whatever needed to be done. I helped out with. Well, I think we must have gone in one of my first visits with Mr. Suderman, his first name escapes me, and they had built this huge house at the very pricey part of Edmonton, and everything was white in it, the rugs, everything. So it was the kind of house where you automatically took your shoes off when you walked in. As our host had done, he was walking around in sock feet. Well, Gary and I did the same, only Gary had holes in his sock. And I learned that day to be who you are, despite.